My daughter found out how much I was worth, showed up with her husband, and screamed, "Give it all to him." I just showed her the $18 million inheritance contract. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if, for a second, you feel like any of this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. It was a Tuesday afternoon in New York, the kind of August heat that seeped through the blinds of my apartment on the Upper West Side. I was watering my geraniums on the balcony, my hands damp with soil and my heart at peace, when I heard the ding of the elevator. Carol, my 43-year-old daughter, had arrived. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her heels clicked against the tiled floor of the hallway like hammers against my tranquility. With her was Kevin, her husband of 8 years, that man with a calculated smile who always looked at me as if he were appraising my furniture. He was wearing a navy blue suit that I knew cost more than what many families spend on groceries in a month, and Carol was in a cream-colored silk dress I had never seen before. "Mom," Carol said, standing before me with a leather-bound folder in her hands, "we need to talk." Her voice had the kind of chill lawyers use right before delivering bad news. I set the watering can in the sink and dried my hands on the embroidered apron my mother had given me 30 years ago. My fingers trembled slightly, as if my body already knew what my mind refused to accept. "What is it, honey?" I asked, gesturing toward the living room. "Do you want some coffee? I have some freshly baked muffins." "No, Mum. This isn't a social visit," Kevin interrupted, adjusting the gold cufflinks on his shirt. "We've discovered some interesting things about your finances." Carol opened the folder with the precise movements of a surgeon about to make an incision. Inside were documents I recognized immediately: bank statements, property deeds, lease agreements. My stomach clenched as if I'd swallowed ground glass. "We know how much you make from the rentals, Mom," Carol said, her eyes gleaming with an avarice I had never seen in them. 3 apartments in the East Village, 2 commercial spaces in Midtown, and this place, which is worth a fortune. Why did you never tell us you had so much money?" The room filled with a heavy silence, the kind that precedes a thunderstorm. The wall clock that had belonged to my grandmother continued to mark the seconds with its hypnotic ticking, the same sound that had accompanied my sleepless nights after my husband, Arthur, passed away 6 years ago. "That money?" I stammered, feeling the words catch in my throat. "Your father and I earned it with 40 years of hard work. He sold insurance door to door, and I did sewing work at home until all hours of the night. Every dollar that went into those properties cost us sacrifices you can't possibly imagine." "That's the past, Mom," Kevin cut in, pacing my living room like a predator marking his territory. "What's important is the present. And in the present, you have resources that we urgently need." Carol came closer, taking my wrinkled hands in her own perfectly manicured ones, and looked at me with the same smile she used as a little girl when she wanted to convince me to buy her a toy. "Mom, you're 74 years old. What do you need such a large estate for? We have 2 children to support, a mortgage that's drowning us, expenses you can't even imagine." "But Carol," I tried to protest. "Give it all to him," she suddenly shouted, pointing at Kevin with a vehemence that left me paralyzed. "Kevin knows business, he can make the money grow. It's the smartest thing you can do." Her words fell on me like stones. Give it all to him. Not, help us, not, could we talk about a loan. Give it all to him. As if I were a senile old woman incapable of managing my own life, as if my only purpose was to hand over everything I had built to a man who wasn't even my own blood. Kevin smiled that smile he had perfected during his years in sales, the one he used to convince people to sign contracts they didn't fully understand. "Helen, I would take care of everything. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing ever again. We would look after you, of course. You could live with us, see your grandchildren every day. Living with us." The words echoed in my head like a prison sentence. I knew Carol well enough to know that living with us meant becoming a tolerated burden, the grandmother who gets in the way when guests are over, who must stay quiet during important dinners, who must be grateful for every crumb of attention as if it were a favor. I slowly stood up from the green velvet armchair where I had spent so many afternoons reading romance novels, where Arthur and I had planned the retirement trips we never got to take because death took him too soon. My legs felt a little weak, but I managed to stay on my feet. "I need to think about it," I said, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Carol and Kevin exchanged a knowing glance, as if they had just won the first battle of a war I didn't even know had started. "Of course, Mom," Carol said, putting the documents back in her folder. "But don't take too long. Time is money, and opportunities can be lost." When they left, taking with them the scent of expensive perfume and ambition disguised as family concern, I was left alone in my living room. The silence grew so thick I could feel it pressing against my temples. I sat back down in my armchair and looked at the photographs on the coffee table: Carol as a little girl, smiling without malice, Arthur and me on our wedding day, the grandchildren on their first day of school. All those images, which for years had been my most precious treasure, now seemed like framed lies. When had my daughter stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as an obstacle between her and my money? How long had she been planning this conversation, calculating the value of my assets, rehearsing the perfect words to convince me to hand my entire life over to a stranger? I couldn't eat dinner that night. The knot in my stomach had grown to fill my entire torso. I made myself some chamomile tea, as I always did when my nerves were frayed, but not even the familiar ritual could calm me. I stayed awake until dawn, watching the first light of day filter through the lace curtains I had sewn myself when we moved into this apartment 30 years ago. And for the first time in decades, I wondered if I truly knew the woman I had raised, fed, and loved unconditionally for 43 years. The next few days were a silent torment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Carol's face as she uttered those words, "Give it all to him." As if 40 years of marriage, of building what we had brick by brick, could be reduced to a simple bank transfer to a man who barely knew our struggles. I sat in the kitchen, a cup of coffee growing cold in my trembling hands, and I began to remember everything I had done for Carol since she was a little girl. Every sacrifice, every dollar saved, every dream deferred to secure her future. The memories came like an avalanche, painful and sharp. I remembered when Carol was 8 and wanted to learn to play the piano. Arthur and I were working double shifts back then. He was selling insurance in the mornings and loading trucks at night. I was doing piecework sewing for a textile factory and cleaning offices on the weekends. But when Carol looked at us with those bright eyes and said she wanted to play like the teacher at school, we sold our only luxury, the color TV we'd bought on an installment plan that had taken 2 years to pay off. With that money, we paid for her lessons for 3 years, until Carol got bored and decided she'd rather do ballet. Without a single complaint, we tightened our belts again and bought her the slippers, the tutu, the classes at the most expensive academy in Boston because, Mom, that's where the other girls go, and I feel bad in my old clothes. When she turned 15, Carol cried for a week because all her friends had the latest smartphones and hers was an embarrassment. I worked overtime for 2 months, sewing until my fingers ached and my eyes blurred under the dining room lamp. But I got the money. I always got the money for Carol. College was another story. Carol wanted to study psychology at Boston University, but her grades weren't good enough for a scholarship. The tuition cost a fortune we didn't have. I remember that July afternoon perfectly, sitting with Arthur on our bed and suggesting we mortgage the apartment. "Helen, we've spent 20 years paying for this place," he said, his voice heavy with the weariness of a lifetime of work. "If we mortgage it and something goes wrong?" "It's for Carol," I answered. "It's for our future, Arthur. Her education is the one thing no one can ever take from us." We signed the papers in September. The mortgage would be extended for another 15 years. Arthur was 52, I was 49. It meant working well into our late 60s so that Carol could graduate debt-free, so she could have the opportunity we never had. Carol graduated 5 years later. She came home with her framed degree, hugged us, and said, "Thank you for believing in me." That night, Arthur and I cried with happiness in the kitchen, holding each other, feeling that every sacrifice had been worth it. But the requests didn't end with college. Carol got a job, yes, but it was temporary, didn't pay well, had no future. She needed a master's degree to get ahead in her field. Another loan. More overtime for me, more weekend jobs for Arthur. Then came Kevin. Carol introduced him as the love of my life, an insurance salesman with expensive suits and a practiced smile. They got married in 2016, a wedding that cost more than many families make in a year. "But Mom, it's my special day." "You only get married once," Carol had said when she saw the look on my face after hearing the quote from the caterer. We mortgaged again. This time, one of the rental properties we had worked so hard to buy. But it was for Carol's happiness, and that justified any sacrifice. Then came the grandchildren, Jacob and Sophia. Carol stopped working to take care of them, and Kevin was going through a rough patch at his company. The bills piled up, their mortgage payments fell behind. I started covering the kids' private school tuition, their extracurricular activities, the designer clothes Carol considered essential, so they wouldn't feel less than their classmates. "It's just temporary, Mom," Carol always said. "Just until Kevin gets a better job." But the years passed, and Kevin never seemed to get that better job. Or he'd get one and lose it a few months later because of clashing with his boss or company restructuring. There was always an excuse, always a crisis to solve, always an emergency that required my financial help. When Arthur got sick, Carol barely came to visit. "I'm so busy with the kids, Mom. You know how to take care of him," she told me over the phone the day he was diagnosed with cancer. During the 8 months of his treatment, I was the one who took him to every chemo session, who stayed up on the nights he was sick, who read to him when his eyes got too weak to watch TV. Carol showed up at the funeral, dressed in impeccable black, crying as if she had been the perfect, devoted wife. She accepted condolences from all our friends, spoke at the cemetery about what a wonderful father he was and how much she would miss him. But when the service was over, when everyone went home and I was left alone with my grief, Carol left too. "I need time to process this, Mom," she said. "The kids need me now more than ever." 3 months went by without a word from her. 3 months in which I learned the meaning of absolute silence, the echo of my own footsteps in an apartment far too big for one person. When she finally called, it was to ask for money again. Kevin had lost another job. Now, sitting in my kitchen with my cold coffee and bitter memories, I started doing the math. In 43 years, I had spent on Carol what other families might spend on 5 children. The piano lessons, the ballet, the smartphones, the college tuition, the master's degree, the wedding, the grandchildren's expenses, Kevin's constant emergencies. Every time she asked for help, I said yes. Every time she needed money, I found a way to get it. And now she wanted everything. Not help, not alone. Everything. My home, my properties, my savings. Everything Arthur and I had built with our blood, sweat, and tears. I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept my bills and took out my old ledger. Page after page of expenses related to Carol. Wire transfers, checks, cash withdrawals. A meticulous accounting of my own fleecing. The final figure took my breath away. In the last 10 years alone, I had given Carol and her family over $250,000. $250,000 that could have been my peace of mind, my vacations, my security for old age. For the first time in my life, I asked myself if Carol saw me as her mother or as her personal ATM. And the answer hurt more than any illness I had ever endured. A week after that soul-crushing conversation, Carol appeared again. She came alone this time, without Kevin, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes and carrying a bouquet of carnations from the corner bodega that felt more like a cheap apology than a gesture of love. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, sitting on the couch without being invited. "I think I was a little direct the other day. It's just that I worry about you so much." Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she had practiced in front of a mirror all morning. She moved closer and took my hands with that fake tenderness she had perfected over the years. "Look around you, Mom. This apartment is too big for you. The stairs, the cleaning, the upkeep. Aren't you tired? Wouldn't it be easier to live somewhere smaller, more manageable?" I looked around my living room, the same room where I had raised Carol, where Arthur and I had spent the best evenings of our lives playing Scrabble, watching the news, arguing about what to plant on the balcony next spring. Every corner held a story, every piece of furniture a memory. How could she reduce 40 years of a shared life to a matter of manageability? "I'm fine here, Carol," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my home." "Yes, but think about it. We have a perfect room for you. The kids would be thrilled to have Grandma around all the time. And Kevin says we can get you a nurse when you need one." "A nurse? What nurse? I'm not sick." Carol sighed with that faint exasperation she used when I didn't understand what she considered obvious. "Mom, you're 74. It's normal to need help. And it's better to be prepared, don't you think?" I fell silent, but inside, something began to boil. Carol already had my future planned out, a helpless old woman, a burden to be managed efficiently. In her mind, I was no longer an independent person, but a logistical problem to be solved. The following days were a series of small humiliations that Carol administered with the precision of Chinese water torture. She would call at the most inconvenient times, always with emergencies that required my money. "Mom, the washing machine broke." "Mom, Jacob needs new books for school." "Mom, Kevin has a big interview but doesn't have a decent suit." Each request came with an impossible deadline and a devastating emotional weight. "If you don't help me, the children will suffer. If Kevin doesn't get this job, we're going to lose our apartment. I can't believe you don't trust your own daughter." But what hurt the most were the visits from the grandchildren. Jacob and Sophia would arrive at my home like little indoctrinated soldiers, repeating phrases they had clearly learned at home. "Grandma, Mommy says you have a lot of money, but you're stingy," Jacob told me one day, with the innocent cruelty of an 8-year-old who doesn't understand the poison he's spreading. "Stingy? Who told you that?" "Daddy. He says you could buy us better things, but you'd rather keep the money for yourself." Sophia, who was 6, just watched me with suspicion, as if I were a stranger who had let her down in some inexplicable way. When I tried to hug her, she pulled away and ran for the phone. "I want to call Mommy. I don't like it here." That night, after the children left, I sat in my bedroom and cried in a way I hadn't since Arthur died. I cried for the lost innocence of my grandchildren, for the lies they were being told about me, for the way Carol was poisoning the next generation against their own grandmother. It was then that I decided to do something I had never done in my 74 years. I decided to snoop. I needed to know what was really being said in Carol's home, what they talked about when I wasn't there. The next day, when Carol asked me to watch the kids urgently because she had an important doctor's appointment, I took the opportunity to look through the handbag she had left on my sofa. Among crumpled receipts and tissues, I found something that froze my blood, a printout of a text conversation between Carol and Kevin. Spoke to the old lady. She's softening up, I think it's working. Did you mention the nursing home? Not yet. First we need her to sign the papers. We'll figure that out later. And if she refuses? She won't. I've scared her enough about being alone, the risk of falling, dementia. She's terrified. Perfect. As soon as everything's in our name, we get rid of the problem. The kids? The kids will understand. It's better for them to learn young that in this life, you have to look out for number one. My hands shook so much I nearly dropped the paper. The old lady. Get rid of the problem. I've scared her enough. Every word was a stab, but the one that hurt most was, the kids will understand. Carol wasn't just betraying me, she was corrupting her own children, teaching them that manipulation and deceit were acceptable tools to get what they wanted. I tucked the paper into my pocket with trembling hands. When Carol returned 2 hours later, I pretended everything was normal, but inside, everything had changed. For the first time, I saw my daughter for who she truly was, a stranger who shared my last name but had lost every trace of humanity in her desperate quest for my money. How were the kids, Mom? She asked, picking up her bag, never suspecting what I had found. They were great, I lied. Jacob told me some very interesting things. Carol's face paled slightly. What things? Nothing important. Just kid stuff. That night, when I was alone, I read the conversation again. Over and over, until I had memorized every word. Then I took out my cell phone, the one Carol always criticized for being ancient, and I photographed every line. I didn't know why I might need that evidence in the future, but something told me it would be important. I poured myself a glass of the wine Arthur and I had been saving for special occasions. There would be no more special occasions, so I decided my awakening deserved a bitter celebration. As I drank, I looked at the family photos on my nightstand, Carol as a baby in my arms, Carol at her first communion, Carol at her graduation, Carol at her wedding. She was smiling in every picture. In some, I was smiling too. But now, knowing what I knew, those smiles seemed like documented lies, false memories of a relationship that perhaps had never been real. For the first time in 74 years, I wondered if I truly knew the person I had given birth to, raised, and loved without condition. And for the first time in my life, the answer terrified me. I turned off the light and lay awake in the dark, listening to the sounds of New York at night, the distant traffic, the neighbors arguing upstairs, the wind rattling the blinds. But louder than any of those sounds was the beating of my own heart, which seemed to repeat like a war drum, enough, enough, enough. On Monday morning, I made the hardest decision of my life. I got up before dawn, put on my best navy blue suit, the same one I had worn to Arthur's funeral, and walked to the bank. The city was slowly waking up around me, street sweepers finishing their night shift, the first commuters waiting for the subway at the 72nd Street station, the smell of coffee and bagels wafting from the delis opening their doors. At the bank, I asked to speak with the manager. Edward Morgan, a man in his 50s who had known Arthur, greeted me with his usual professional courtesy, but I saw something different in his eyes when I explained what I needed to do. Helen, are you sure you want to revoke all of Carol's authorizations on your accounts? His words hung in the air. For 15 years, Carol had full access to my finances. She could make transfers, withdraw cash, even apply for loans using my properties as collateral. I had seen it as a sign of motherly trust, now I understood it had been my greatest mistake. Completely sure, I replied, though my voice trembled slightly. Edward gave me a look I'd learned to recognize on the faces of people who knew more than they were saying. As the bank manager, he had watched my accounts being systematically drained for years. He had witnessed huge transfers in Carol's name, loans I'd co-signed for Kevin's failed business ventures, constant payments that had cut my retirement savings by more than half. If you don't mind me saying, Helen, this is a decision you should have made a long time ago. I signed all the necessary papers. I revoked the authorizations, changed my passwords, and requested that any transaction over $500 require my physical presence at the bank. For the first time in decades, my finances were under my control and mine alone. When I left the bank, the sun was fully up, and the city was pulsing with its usual rhythm. But I felt different, as if I had crossed an invisible line into unknown territory. For the first time in my adult life, I had made a major decision without consulting anyone, without asking permission, without considering Carol's feelings. The call came at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Mom, what did you do? Carol's voice was hysterical, shrill, completely out of control. I tried to make a transfer and it says I'm not authorized. What did you do? I revoked your access to my accounts, I answered with a calmness that surprised me. The silence that followed was so thick I could feel it pressing against my ear. Then, the explosion. Are you crazy? I have bills to pay. The kids need things. You can't do this to me. Yes, I can, Carol. It's my money. But I'm your daughter. You trust me. For the first time in 43 years, my daughter had told a lie so blatant that even she must have known it. Trust? After I had read her texts about the old lady and getting rid of the problem? Trust is earned, Carol. And it can be lost. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, Mom. You're different. Have you been talking to someone? A doctor? Because this isn't normal. Sometimes, older people. There it was. The card I had been waiting for her to play. The insinuation about my mental state, the suggestion that my decisions were invalid because I was older. It was exactly what I had read in her conversation with Kevin. I've scared her enough about dementia. Carol, I am 74 years old, not senile. And my mind is perfectly clear. Then come over. Let's talk like a family. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix. I hung up the phone with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. My heart was racing, but not with fear. It felt something like euphoria. For the first time in decades, I had won an argument with Carol. They didn't take long to arrive. At 6 o'clock, I heard the elevator and then a pounding on my door. But this time it wasn't just Carol and Kevin. The children were with them, Jacob and Sophia, their faces tear-streaked. Mom, open the door. We need to talk. Carol's voice was different. Deeper, more threatening. I opened it, because I had nothing to hide. Carol stormed in, with Kevin at her heels and the children trailing behind. What have you been telling my kids? She screamed, pointing a finger at me as if I were a criminal. Jacob has been crying ever since I told him I couldn't buy him the new bike he wanted. I haven't said anything to your children. Of course you have. You told them you're not going to help us anymore. Look at them. I looked at Jacob and Sophia. Their eyes were indeed red and swollen. But it wasn't sadness I saw on their faces, it was confusion. They were too young to understand why their grandmother, who had always given them everything they asked for, had suddenly become mean. Carol, sit down. Let's talk. I'm not sitting down. You're going to fix this right now. Kevin, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. His salesman's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of cold calculation. Helen, I think you're making a very serious mistake. Your family needs you. And you need your family. A woman your age, living all alone, a lot of things can happen. The threat was subtle but clear. My age, my solitude, my vulnerability. It was all on the table. Are you threatening me, Kevin? Not at all. I'm just reminding you of reality. You're not going to be around forever. And when the time comes, who's going to be there? Who's going to look after your interests? Carol nodded vehemently. Exactly, Mom. Think about it. We're your family. The only ones who really love you. I looked at my grandchildren, who were watching the scene with wide, frightened eyes. These children were witnessing a lesson in how to manipulate a vulnerable person, how to use family love as a weapon, how to threaten abandonment to get what you want. Jacob, Sophia, go into the kitchen. There are cookies in the blue jar. The children scurried away, clearly relieved to escape the tension. As soon as they were gone, I faced Carol and Kevin with a mental clarity I hadn't possessed in years. I've read your texts, I said simply. Carol's face went white. What texts? I took out my phone and showed them the photo I had taken. Kevin cursed under his breath, but Carol tried to maintain her composure. Mom, that can be interpreted in a lot of ways. A lot of ways? Get rid of the problem. The old lady is softening up. How can you interpret that in a lot of ways? The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was the silence of people who have been caught in a lie so profound they can no longer deny it. Kevin was the first to break it. All right. Since we're being honest, let's be blunt. You have more money than you could possibly spend in the time you have left. We have a family to support. It's simple math. Simple math? Yes. You die, we inherit. It's better to arrange it now while we can still take care of you, than later when it's too late. Carol looked at him in horror. Clearly, she hadn't expected Kevin to be so direct. But it was too late to back down. Out, I said, my voice steely. Get out of my apartment. Now. Mom, get out. My shout echoed through the apartment. From the kitchen, I heard the children start to cry again. Carol ran to get them, while Kevin stared at me with an expression of pure, concentrated venom. This isn't over, Helen. You can't live forever. When they were gone, I stood alone in my living room, trembling not with fear, but with a rage so pure it gave me a strength I never knew I had. For the first time in my life, I had seen my daughter without the filter of motherly love. And what I saw had broken my heart, but it had also set me free. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The following days were the strangest of my life. For the first time in 43 years, my phone didn't ring every couple of hours with an urgent request from Carol. There were no desperate texts about overdue bills, no tearful calls about emergencies that always required my money. The silence was so complete that at first, it frightened me. I had become so accustomed to the constant chaos that peace felt suspicious. On Wednesday morning, as I was having a quiet breakfast in my kitchen, I realized something extraordinary: I was not in a hurry. For decades, my mornings had been defined by the anxiety of what new problem I would have to solve, what new financial crisis of Carol's awaited me before noon. Now, sitting by my window with a cup of coffee and toast with orange marmalade, I could hear the sparrows chirping on the balcony and think of nothing else. I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: go for a walk with no destination. I dressed comfortably, grabbed my small purse, and stepped out onto the street with no plan at all. New York greeted me with a golden autumn light that made even the oldest buildings look beautiful. I walked down Broadway, looking in shop windows I had previously only glanced at while rushing to the bank to solve one of Carol's financial messes. In a small bookstore near the village, I stopped. It had been so long since I'd bought a book for myself that I'd forgotten the simple pleasure of flipping through new pages, of smelling the fresh paper, of choosing a story just because I felt like reading it. I bought a romance novel I would never have had time to read when my days were spent being the solution to everyone else's problems. Afterward, I went into a cafe that smelled of cinnamon and freshly ground coffee. I ordered a latte and a slice of apple pie and sat by the window. Around me, life went on as usual: students on their laptops, retired couples discussing the day's news, young mothers with strollers sipping tea while their babies slept. For the first time in years, I felt like a part of that normal world, not just someone passing through between one crisis and the next. But the real revelation came that afternoon when I returned home and sat in my favorite armchair with my new book. For 3 straight hours, I read, uninterrupted. No one called asking for money. No one showed up at my door with a manufactured emergency. No one made me feel guilty for taking time for myself. The silence in my apartment was no longer the absence of life, it was the presence of peace. That night, as I prepared dinner for one, I realized something that moved me to tears: I was cooking what I wanted to eat. A simple cheese omelette, nothing fancy or expensive, but it was exactly what I was craving. For years, I had cooked with Carol, Kevin, and the kids in mind, adapting my meals to their tastes and demands. Now, for the first time in decades, my dinner depended solely on my own desires. On Thursday morning, the phone broke my new routine. But it wasn't Carol. It was my neighbor, Barbara, a woman my age who lived downstairs and with whom I had exchanged little more than polite greetings for years. "Helen, would you like to come down for a coffee?" I made some coffee cake. The invitation caught me so off guard it took me a few seconds to respond. How long had it been since someone had invited me to do something without wanting anything in return? When was the last time a conversation hadn't revolved around Carol's problems or her children's needs? Barbara's apartment was bright and cozy, decorated with photos from travels I never knew she'd taken. As we had coffee on her small but lushly planted terrace, I discovered that my neighbor had a fascinating life that I had completely ignored. She had been a history teacher, had traveled all over Europe with her husband before he passed, and had 3 children who visited regularly but were not financially dependent on her. "So how are you, Helen?" "I haven't seen Carol around lately." The question was unexpected. For years, my relationship with Carol had been the central theme of my existence, but now, sitting on Barbara's terrace with the sun warming my face, I realized I didn't want to talk about my daughter. I didn't want to contaminate this moment of peace with the bitter memories of the last few months. "We're taking a break from each other," I said simply. Barbara nodded with the wisdom of someone who has lived long enough to understand that sometimes families need distance to heal. "Sometimes it's for the best," she commented. "My eldest son and I had our differences a few years back. We didn't speak for almost a year. In the end, when we reconnected, our relationship was much healthier for it." Her words gave me a perspective I hadn't considered. Maybe this distance wasn't the end of my relationship with Carol, maybe it was the beginning of a new way of relating, one where I wasn't solely her source of funding. That afternoon, when I returned to my apartment, I found a message on my answering machine. It was Carol, but her tone had changed completely. It was no longer hysterical or threatening, it sounded calculating. "Mom, I've been thinking. I think we need to talk like adults. I know things have been tense lately, but we're family, and families get through their differences. Why don't you come for dinner on Saturday? The kids miss you. We can talk calmly, no pressure." I deleted the message without a second thought. I knew that tone of voice all too well. It was the same one she used as a teenager when she wanted something expensive, the same one she'd employed to convince me to mortgage the apartment for her wedding. Carol had changed her strategy, but the goal remained the same. On Friday, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years. I visited Arthur's grave. I hadn't been since the first anniversary of his death because Carol always had some crisis that demanded my immediate attention. Dad would understand that the living are more important than the dead, she had told me at the time, and I had accepted that cruel logic without question. Woodlawn Cemetery was peaceful that afternoon. I brought fresh flowers, white daisies that were Arthur's favorite, and sat on the bench across from his headstone. For the first time since he died, I was able to talk to him without the pressure of time, without the anxiety of knowing Carol was waiting for me at home with some new problem to solve. "I've missed you," I said to the gray marble stone. "And I think you would have known what to do about Carol long before I did." The wind rustled the leaves in the nearby trees, creating a whisper that almost sounded like an answer. I stayed there until dusk, feeling closer to Arthur than I had in years. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel guilty for being alive when he was gone. When I got home that night, there was another message from Carol. This time her voice was different, more urgent, more desperate. "Mom, I need to talk to you urgently." "Kevin, well, something's happened. Please, come over tomorrow. It's important." But I was no longer the woman who came running every time Carol called. The woman who had spent the afternoon talking to her dead husband, who had eaten a peaceful breakfast, who had bought a book for pleasure, who had discovered she had an interesting neighbor, that woman had learned that her life had value beyond her usefulness to others. That night, for the first time in 6 years, I slept soundly through the night. And when I woke up on Saturday morning, instead of feeling anxious about Carol's message, I felt something I had forgotten existed: curiosity about what the day might bring. I got up without rushing, made myself a full breakfast with toast, ham, cheese, and fresh squeezed orange juice, and sat down to plan my day. Carol was not in that plan, and the freedom that gave me was so intense it was almost dizzying. For the first time in 43 years, my Saturday belonged entirely to me. On Saturday afternoon, as I was watering the plants on my balcony with the peace of someone who had finally found their rhythm, I heard frantic footsteps on the stairs. Not the elevator, someone had run up all 4 flights. The banging on my door was so violent that a few neighbors peeked out of their peepholes. "Mom, open the door, right now." Carol's voice was unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't manipulation or pleading, it was pure panic. I opened the door, and the sight was shocking. Carol's makeup was smeared, her hair was a mess, and a fresh red mark was visible on her neck. She was wearing the same clothes as the day before, wrinkled as if she'd slept in them. Kevin was behind her, and he looked even worse. He had a black eye, a split lip, and what looked like dried blood on his hands. "We need help," Carol said, pushing past me without an invitation. "We need money. Now." "What happened?" "We owe money to dangerous people," Kevin muttered, avoiding my eyes. "A lot of money." I sat down slowly in my armchair, observing the 2 people who had just shattered my peace. For the first time in months, I saw them clearly, not as family in need, but as what they really were. 2 adults who had made terrible choices and now wanted me to pay the price. "How much money?" $150,000, Carol whispered. "Kevin invested in a business deal. It turned out to be a scam. And the other investors weren't exactly legitimate. $150,000. More than most people make in 5 years. More than I had managed to save in my entire working life. And they wanted it from me, as if it were their right, as if I were responsible for cleaning up the disasters created by their reckless decisions. "I don't have $150,000, I said, with a calmness that surprised even me. "Yes, you do," Carol shrieked. "You have the properties. You can sell them. You can mortgage them." Of course. I'm supposed to sell my entire life's work to save Kevin from his bad decisions. "He's your family." Carol lunged toward me, her eyes bloodshot. "We're all you have. If something happens to us, you'll be alone forever." Kevin, who had been silent, stepped forward. His swollen face couldn't hide the desperation underneath. "Helen, you don't understand how serious this is. These people, they don't forgive debts. If we don't pay them within a week, they're going to hurt us. Really hurt us. And the kids, too," Carol added, her voice breaking in a way that, for a moment, made me hesitate. "They said if we don't pay, they'll go after the whole family. The children. Jacob and Sophia." For an instant, the old maternal instinct flared in my chest like a physical pain. But then I remembered the text messages, the threats, the years of emotional manipulation. How many times had Carol used her children as weapons against me? "Where are Jacob and Sophia right now?" "They're somewhere safe," Carol stammered. "Where?" "With friends." The lie was so obvious it was almost laughable. The kids were probably at school or a friend's house, completely oblivious to the drama their parents had created. This threat against them was just one more manipulation, the last card Carol thought she could play to get my money. "Carol, sit down. Both of you, sit." They obeyed, Carol on the sofa and Kevin in the chair that had been Arthur's. Seeing that man in my husband's place sent a wave of anger through me so intense I had to close my eyes for a moment to control it. I'm going to ask you a question, I said when I had regained my composure. And I want an honest answer. At any point in this conversation, did either of you think to apologize? Carol looked at me, confused. Apologize? For what? For calling me the old lady. For planning to get rid of the problem. For threatening me in my own home. For teaching my grandchildren to disrespect me. For using my love as a tool for blackmail for years. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Carol opened her mouth a few times as if to speak, but no sound came out. Kevin stared at his blood-stained hands as if they were the most fascinating things in the world. You have no idea what you've done, do you? I continued. You think this is just another financial crisis for Mom to solve. You don't understand that you have destroyed something that can never be repaired. Mom, Carol started to cry, but these weren't the manipulative tears I had seen so many times before. These were different, desperate, real, terrified. I have given you everything, Carol. Everything. My money, my time, my health, my peace of mind. I sacrificed my marriage, my retirement, my own happiness so that you could have a comfortable life. And the only thing I have ever gotten in return is contempt. I stood up and walked to the desk where I kept my important documents. I pulled out a manila envelope I had prepared last week, after my visit to the lawyer. Inside were copies of my will, my property deeds, my bank accounts. And something else. Do you know what I'm actually worth? I asked, holding up the document on top. Carol took the paper with trembling hands. As she read, her face grew paler and paler. $18 million, she whispered. You have 18 million? Had, I corrected. Past tense. What do you mean? I pulled the second document from the envelope. It was a copy of the contract I had signed 3 days earlier with the Helen Arthur Foundation for Senior Women. I've donated my entire estate to a foundation that helps women like me. Women who have been abandoned, manipulated, or abused by their own families. Carol stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. Her eyes scanned the lines, but her brain seemed unable to process the information. No, you can't do this. I already have. But that's our inheritance. It's your grandchildren's future. The grandchildren you taught to call me stingy. The grandchildren you use as emotional weapons every time you need money. Kevin shot up from the chair so abruptly he nearly knocked it over. She's insane. This can't be legal. A woman her age can't make decisions like this. I am 74, Kevin, not senile. And the lawyer certified that I am of sound mind and body. Carol had stopped crying. In its place, a look of pure hatred had settled on her face, a mask of resentment that completely transformed her familiar features. You've ruined us, she said, her voice so cold it was barely human. You've sentenced us to death because you're selfish. I didn't ruin you. You ruined yourselves with your choices. I've just decided to stop being your safety net. And what are you going to do now? Kevin asked with a cruel smirk. Live like a pauper until you die? Because without us, you have no one. For the first time in the entire conversation, I smiled. A real, genuine smile, filled with a peace I hadn't felt in years. I have the foundation. I'm going to work with women who've been through what I have. I'm going to help other mothers recognize when they're being manipulated. And when I die, which I hope won't be for a very long time, I'll die knowing my money did something good in the world. Carol stood up slowly, her movements robotic, like an automaton whose batteries had run out. This can't be happening, she muttered. This just can't be happening. Carol, I said, approaching my daughter one last time. You still have time to change. To get real help for your problems. To learn to live without depending on someone else's money. But I can't be the one to save you this time. She walked to the door like a sleepwalker, with Kevin following her. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. I will never forgive you for this, she said. I know, I replied. But I've already forgiven myself. When they were gone, I locked the door and leaned against it. For the first time in my 74 years, I was completely and utterly free. The days following the final break with Carol were like waking from a nightmare that had lasted for decades. For the first time in my adult life, there were no screams, no manipulative tears, no veiled threats about my age or my mental health. There was only a golden silence that wrapped around me like a cashmere blanket after years of sleeping on broken glass. On Tuesday morning, I received a call that would change everything. It was Pamela Sanders, the director of the Helen Arthur Foundation, the institution to which I had donated my estate. Her warm, professional voice carried an energy I hadn't felt in years. Helen, we would love to invite you to see our facilities and meet some of the women who are benefiting from your generosity. If you're interested, we could also discuss the possibility of you becoming more actively involved in our programs. Actively involved? For 40 years, I had been actively involved in managing Carol's crises, but I had never been involved in something that truly filled my soul. The idea of using my experience to help other women in similar situations sparked an excitement I hadn't felt since my early years of marriage with Arthur. The foundation was located in a renovated building in the Lower East Side, with large windows that flooded the space with light. When I walked in, I was greeted by the smell of fresh coffee and the gentle hum of quiet conversation. It was the sound of women speaking without fear, without the tension I had associated with family gatherings for so many years. Pamela introduced me to Mercedes, a 68-year-old woman who came to the foundation after her son kicked her out of her own house to sell it and pay off his gambling debts. To Esperanza, 72, who had spent her life cleaning houses to support a daughter who abandoned her in a rundown nursing home when she could no longer work. To Rose, 65, who lost all her savings because she co-signed papers she didn't understand to help her son-in-law with a non-existent business. Each story was different, yet they all shared the same core of pain: women who had given everything for their families only to be discarded when they were no longer useful. Women like me, who had mistaken unconditional love for financial submission, who had raised children unable to distinguish between affection and an open wallet. Your donation, Pamela explained as we toured the rooms where these women had found refuge, doesn't just provide them with food and shelter. It gives them back their dignity. Many of them arrive here believing they're worthless, that they're a burden on the world. Here, they learn that their lives have value beyond what they can give to others. Her words hit me with an unexpected force. I, too, had reached the age of 74 believing my worth was measured by my usefulness to Carol, by my ability to solve her financial problems, by my willingness to sacrifice my well-being for hers. But now, watching my money transform into hope for women who had suffered similar abandonments, I understood that my life had taken on an entirely new purpose. I'd like to get involved, I told Pamela. Not just financially. I want to be here, to help directly. Over the next few weeks, I began visiting the foundation 3 times a week. Not as a distant benefactor, but as an active volunteer. I helped in the digital literacy workshops, where women who had never touched a computer learned to use ATMs and communicate via email with family members who actually valued them. I participated in the support groups where we shared stories of family manipulation and learned to recognize the red flags we had ignored for decades. But what filled me most was the Reclaiming Self-Esteem workshop I led on Wednesday afternoons. It was a circle of 8 women who sat in comfortable chairs, with tea and homemade cookies, and spoke without masks about the pain of being betrayed by the people they loved most. I raised 3 sons, shared Eleanor, a woman with the same name as a character from a book I loved, in one of those sessions. I gave them everything I had and everything I didn't. When my husband died, I sold the family home to divide the inheritance among them. I kept the bare minimum, thinking they would take care of me when I got older. It's been 2 years now, and I haven't heard from any of them. And how do you feel now? I asked, using the techniques I had learned from Pamela. Free, she answered with a smile that reminded me of my own on the day Carol left my home for good. It took me a long time to understand it, but being invisible to my children is better than just being their ATM. Every Wednesday, these conversations healed me a little more. Seeing how other women transformed their pain into wisdom, their abandonment into independence, made me realize that my break with Carol hadn't been an ending, but a beginning. One day, while organizing files for new aid applications, I found a folder that caught my eye. It was the story of a 50-year-old woman who had come to the foundation after her mother kicked her out for refusing to hand over her entire salary to support her drug-addicted brother. The woman's name was Christine, and her story was different from the others. She had been the victim of a manipulative mother, not the manipulated mother. Could I meet Christine? I asked Pamela. I'd like to understand her perspective. Christine was a slender woman with intelligent eyes who had worked as an accountant for 20 years. Her mother had used family guilt to force her to finance her brother's addiction, threatening suicide every time Christine tried to set boundaries. For years, I believed it was my duty to keep the family together, she told me during our first coffee. My mother would tell me that if my brother died of an overdose, it would be my fault for not giving enough money for his treatment. But the money never went to treatment, it went to more drugs. How did you manage to get out of that situation? One day, my brother robbed me. He broke into my apartment while I was at work and took everything of value, my grandmother's jewelry, the TV, even my diabetes medication. When I told my mother what happened, she said I probably deserved it for being so selfish with him. It had taken Christine months to make the decision to cut off all contact with her family. She had lost not only her mother and brother but also aunts, cousins, and family friends who considered her refusal to continue funding her brother's self-destruction to be unchristian and anti-family. Do you regret it? I asked, genuinely curious. Never, she replied without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I work for myself. I eat what I like, live where I want, and sleep peacefully. I've discovered that real family isn't about who shares your blood, but who respects your well-being. Her words resonated with me for days. Real family. When had Carol ever been real family to me? When had she shown genuine concern for my well-being, my happiness, my dreams? I tried to remember a single conversation in the last 10 years where Carol had asked how I was feeling, what I needed, what I wanted for my future. I couldn't think of one. Instead, at the foundation, I had found something I didn't know I was looking for: women who cared about me without wanting anything in return. Mercedes, who brought me gardening magazines because she remembered I mentioned liking plants. Esperanza, who saved me the biggest piece of cake when we celebrated a birthday at the foundation. Rose, who called just to ask how I had slept. A month after my last conversation with Carol, Pamela made me an offer that changed my life forever. Helen, the management team and I have been talking, and we'd like to offer you a position as an emotional support coordinator. You have a natural ability to connect with the women who come here, and your personal experience gives you a credibility that no academic training can provide. A job. At 74? For decades, I had defined my identity as Carol's mother, Arthur's widow, Jacob and Sophia's grandmother. Now I was being offered a completely new identity: Helen, the woman who helped other women reclaim their self-worth. Can I think about it? I asked, though in my heart, I already knew the answer. That night, sitting on my balcony with a glass of red wine and watching the lights of New York stretch to the horizon, I made the most liberating decision of my life. The next day, I would accept the job, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the purpose. For the first time in 74 years, I was going to work for something that truly mattered. And for the first time in my life, that life belonged completely to me. 6 months after my last conversation with Carol, I woke up on a spring morning with a feeling I had forgotten existed: excitement for the day ahead. It was a Saturday in May, and the sun streamed through my window with that golden light that makes New York City seem like a fairy tale. I made myself a coffee with cream, toast with avocado and a sprinkle of salt, and sat on my renewed balcony, where red geraniums and fresh mint I had planted myself were now thriving. The foundation had changed me as much as I had changed the lives of the women I helped. Every day, I woke up knowing that my experience, my pain transformed into wisdom, would serve to guide other women toward their own liberation. I was an emotional support coordinator, but I was also something more valuable: I was living proof that it's never too late to take your life back. That morning, I had a special appointment. Mercedes, the woman who had come to the foundation after her son kicked her out of her home, was moving into her own apartment. She had found a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic, saved enough money for the security deposit, and for the first time in 5 years, she was going to have a home that no one could take away from her. I arrived at the foundation early and helped Mercedes pack her few belongings. As I folded her new clothes, bought with her first paycheck, I realized I was witnessing something sacred: the birth of a free woman. Helen, Mercedes said as she closed her suitcase, I want you to know that you saved my life. Not with your money, though that was important too. You saved me by showing me that I could live without begging for love. Her words filled me with a profound satisfaction I had never felt during all the years I had saved Carol from her crises. Because this time, the rescue had been mutual. By helping Mercedes recognize her worth, I had finished recognizing my own. After dropping Mercedes off at her new apartment, I decided to take a walk through Central Park. It was one of my favorite Saturday activities, something I had never been able to do when my weekends were consumed by Carol's constant emergencies. As I walked among the families strolling with their children, the retired couples sitting on benches reading the paper, the young people playing guitar under the trees, I realized that for the first time in decades, I was part of this normal world of people enjoying their free time without guilt. On a bench near the lake, I sat down to watch the ducks swimming in lazy circles. It was then that I saw her, a woman about my age, sitting alone on the opposite bench, crying silently as she read what looked like a letter. Her posture, the way she held the papers with trembling hands, the expression of contained grief on her face, it all reminded me of myself a year ago. I approached her with the gentleness I had learned in my months at the foundation. Are you all right? Is there anything I can do to help? The woman looked up. Her eyes were red, but she had a dignity about her that felt familiar. Her name was Beatrice, and she told me she had just received a letter from her 3 children informing her that they had decided to sell the family home to split the money, and that she would have to find alternative living arrangements. 40 years I've lived in that house, she said in a broken voice. My husband and I bought it when the children were small. Every corner holds a memory. And they just see it as money. I offered her a tissue and sat down beside her. For the next hour, Beatrice told me a story that could have been my own: decades of unacknowledged sacrifices, of unreciprocated love, of generosity that was taken as an obligation. Her children had decided that at 78, she was too old to live alone and that it was better to monetize the family assets before she got any worse. Do you have somewhere to go? I asked. My children say they found a very nice facility for me. But I don't want to go to a facility. I want to stay in my house, with my things, with my memories. I told her about the foundation. I explained that it wasn't a facility but a community, a place where women like us had found not only refuge but purpose. I told her about Mercedes, Esperanza, and Rose, about all the women who had transformed their abandonment into strength. But I'm not like you, Beatrice told me. I still love my children. I still hope they'll change their minds. I loved my daughter, too, I replied. I still do, in a different way. But I learned that loving someone doesn't mean you let them destroy you. And that sometimes, the greatest act of love is to step away so they have a chance to grow up. I gave her Pamela's card and asked her to call me if she decided to visit the foundation. As she walked away slowly toward the park exit, I thought of all the Beatrices in New York, in the country, in the world, older women who realized too late that they had mistaken love for submission. That night, as I was having dinner in my kitchen, lit by candles I'd lit just because I liked the atmosphere they created, I received an unexpected call. It was my neighbor, Barbara, the one who had invited me for coffee months ago. Helen, would you like to come over for dinner tomorrow? My children are visiting from Philadelphia, and I'd love for you to meet them. I'm always telling them about you, about how brave you've been. The invitation moved me in a way I hadn't expected. Barbara wanted her children to meet me not as a charity case, but as her friend. It was the first time in years anyone had introduced me as someone admirable rather than someone who needed help. The next day, dinner at Barbara's was a revelation. Her children, Charles and Bethany, were responsible adults who treated their mother with genuine respect. They asked about her hobbies, listened to her opinions, and included her in conversations as an equal. During dinner, I observed the family dynamic with the fascination of an anthropologist discovering a new culture. Mom told us you work at a foundation for women, Bethany said to me. It must be very rewarding to help people in need. It is, I replied. But I think they help me as much as I help them. Charles nodded in understanding. That's what Mom always says. That giving and receiving aren't separate things, but two parts of the same whole. That night, walking back to my apartment under a starry sky, I reflected on the contrast between Barbara's family and the one I'd had with Carol. The difference wasn't in the amount of love but in the quality of respect. Barbara's children loved her as a whole person, not as a function. They saw her as someone with wisdom to share, not as someone with resources to exploit. It had taken me 74 years to understand that I deserved that kind of respect, that I could demand it without feeling guilty, that my worth did not depend on my usefulness to others. A month later, I received a letter. My heart sped up when I recognized Carol's handwriting on the envelope, but when I opened it, I found something I didn't expect, an apology. It wasn't the usual emotional manipulation, but something different, more mature. Mom, the letter read, I've been going to therapy. I've started to understand things about myself that I don't like. My therapist is helping me see that I treated you like it was your job to fix everything, and that wasn't fair. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I'm working on being a better person. The kids miss you. I miss you too, but I understand why you had to get away from us. I read the letter 3 times. There was pain in it, but also something I had never seen in Carol, personal accountability. She didn't ask for money. She didn't accuse me of being cruel. She didn't threaten me with dire consequences. She simply acknowledged the damage she had caused and stated her intention to change. I didn't reply immediately. For days, I reflected on what the letter meant to me. Was it the beginning of a possible reconciliation? Was it too little, too late? Could I trust that Carol's change was real and not just a more sophisticated manipulation? In the end, I decided to write a short response. Carol, I'm glad to hear you're getting help. That is the greatest gift you can give to yourself and your children. I wish you the best on your journey. For now, I need more time. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was simply the truth. I needed more time to heal, to make sure my new life was solid enough to allow Carol back into it without destroying the peace I had found. This morning, as I write these reflections in my journal, I can say something I never thought I would be able to say. I am happy. Not the conditional happiness I had known before, which depended on Carol being okay, on there being no family crises, on everyone being pleased with me. This is an unconditional happiness, born from knowing my own worth and using my life for something that truly matters. I look out my window and see a future full of possibilities, women to help, plants to care for, books to read, friends like Barbara to share quiet dinners with, meaningful work at the foundation. For the first time in 74 years, my life is completely my own. And it is a beautiful life. Have you ever experienced a situation similar to mine? Do you know someone who has gone through something like this? Tell me about it in the comments. If this story has touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it. Because it's never too late to take your life back, and you're never too old to start over.